Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zack Kucharski. I'm the executive editor at the Gazette in Cedar Rapids, and this is the kickoff to our first Iowa Ideas in Depth Week focused on community development. Today, we're going to be taking a state view, talking about advancing Iowa's communities. I'm going to have each of my panelists introduce themselves, but before I kick it over to them, I wanted to kind of quickly give a couple housekeeping announcements to say that this is the first of our Iowa Ideas in Depth Weeks. We are recording this webinar. It will be available for playback. If you have questions to ask, we're going to open with some starter questions, but if you have questions, please throw those in the Q&A and they will be asked as we get to them. And so today we're going to have a conversation about advancing Iowa communities. Obviously, we're in a point in time where there's unique opportunities happening as we come out of the pandemic. There's a lot going on. There's a huge investment going on in broadband. There are workforce challenges. There are, I think, the new normal is being written as we go each month, it seems. And so I'm excited to kind of get the panel going, and I'll have each of the folks that we have gathered here today have immense experience in this area. And so, Sandy, I was hoping that maybe you could start with an introduction, and we'll go with you.
Great, thanks, Zach. I am delighted to be here and to talk about communities. I actually started my work in communities in Jefferson as the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Director there. So I quickly learned that everything starts and ends in economic development with that local community. I had the opportunity to host 8 bell tower festivals and RAGBRAI my last summer in Jefferson, which gave me enough local economic development work to say, I think I could be a community consultant for the state. So my next opportunity was with the State Economic Development Organization, where my title actually was community consultant, and I had the western half of the state as my territory. And then I also, in state government, was in charge of the entire community development division there, which, if you know about that, anything that you think of in programming that relates to communities was within that division. So the Downtown Resource Center and Main Street, Iowa, and housing and infrastructure programs, tourism, and even the community foundations came into being when I was there with the Endow Iowa tax credit program. So lots of experience with many different things related to community development. And most recently, my finale of my career has been at the Iowa Farm Bureau, where I've worked with a Renew Rural Iowa program there. Again, the focus on entrepreneurship, but they also understand we're not moving the land, so we better have viable communities. And that my relationship with communities there has taken the role of the Iowa Rural Development Council, some leadership, and I'll get into that more later, which rolled us into the Empower Rural Iowa initiative. So kind of an evolution of a career revolving around community development.
All right, Sandy, thank you. Liesl, now you're with the Iowa Economic Development Authority today. Can you talk a little bit about your role?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on this panel today. Looking forward to it. I am Liesl Seabert. I am the Rural Community Revitalization Program Manager within the Center for Rural Revitalization at IEDA. And all of that essentially means that I manage the Governor's Empower Iowa initiative and then help with implementation of those recommendations annually. So currently, in addition to managing Empower and the 3 task forces associated with Empower, also manage 5 different small grant programs for rural communities. We've hosted now 2 leadership exchange events. Last year, we also kicked off a leadership bootcamp program. So every year we're just adding kind of new pieces to the puzzle to help strengthen our rural communities across the state.
All right. And Director Greenfield, now you're with the USDA. Can you kind of explain your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, thank you so much for the invitation to join you and these really talented leaders for today's conversation. So I'm Theresa Greenfield, and I am the State Director for USDA Rural Development. And what we do at Rural Development is we invest and are partners with the smallest of communities across the state. We provide loans, grants, and loan guarantees. And last year, in 2021 fiscal year, we invested about $700 million across this state in about 50 programs that we offer. So we've got a little something for everybody. But what we focus on is housing, community facilities, you know, those ambulances and fire trucks and libraries and hospitals, and business programs where we work with the local community if they have a need and help them find those resources to grow the businesses. Background for me that brought me to this role, well, I grew up rural and in a small farm, and have lived and worked both in rural areas and urban areas, but spent most of my life working as a community planner with the smallest of townships and the largest of cities, and really had my boots on the ground in helping them pull together public and private resources to help support economic development. I bring a lot of the private sector, so the other side of the table, to experience to this role. From running a home building company and working commercial real estate development. So I'm delighted to be here today. This is a great conversation. So thank you for hosting this week of Ideas Talks.
Oh, thank you. And I think we'll start with kind of an orientation type of question. And I'm curious to kind of get each of your thoughts. As we come out of COVID, where do you think the state is? And how do you think the current state or the current condition of Iowa communities, what do you see as kind of the bright spots as we come out of COVID? And we'll get to the opportunities or some of the challenges in a few minutes, but I'm kind of curious, taking stock of where we are today, what do you see? And Liesl, I'll start with you. I'll kind of do the debate format where I don't always start with the same person.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have to say that this role is actually relatively new. So I started in July of 2019, working very specifically with rural communities. So kind of what background I had before COVID is minimal, but I will say that during the COVID period and coming out of it, the most hopeful pieces have been kind of some new partnerships and communities and organizations and governments being willing to kind of step outside of their lane a little bit and address things in different ways. And I think that we've seen a lot more creative, innovative approaches to some new challenges that have really forced communities, especially the rural communities I work with, to think differently about how they go about things and to think about partnerships differently and resources differently. And it's been really inspiring to see some of the solutions they've come up with. And I think we might dig into some of those a little bit more and some of the resources that are out there, but that kind of innovative partnerships has been, I think, one of the biggest things I have seen coming out of COVID.
Director Greenfield.
Well, I agree with Liesl. We've just seen a lot of creativity and collaboration as we come out of COVID. As I've traveled the state in this role, businesses have reimagined how they do business, who they do business with. And one of the things that's been great is broadband. We talked about the need for it. I know we're going to talk about it later today. We could talk about it all show. But I tell you, the use of it has been highlighted with COVID and the need for it. And the investments that are coming from the federal level and the state level are unprecedented and are really going to help transform business in the future and how we do economic development. So I'm excited about what we've learned from COVID, as tough as it was, and how we move forward.
And Sandy.
Well, I would just say I'm most excited about the fact that there's really a positive light shining on rural. It wasn't always that way. And I think, we've demonstrated that it can be a lifestyle that's really a preferred lifestyle for a lot of people. And, just the fact that we have these case studies now because of COVID, people really saying, wow, and of course, broadband, the infrastructure piece has been critical to that. And so I think that's one of the most exciting things, along with that creativity and innovation that we've all been talking about. So, yeah, I got the big hope on my head too for what's coming down the pike.
what do you think has led kind of to that creativity? Is that the normal being thrown out the window, or kind of the prolonged nature of it? I mean, is it survival? What do you see as kind of the driver that's maybe changed things a bit?
I think a couple of things. People's lives were really slowed down, and so you had time to think a little bit, like simplification sometimes leads to creativity, I believe. So I think to me, that's one piece. I think also we've seen some really cool leadership changes generationally, and just, I often talk about the shoes under the table need to look different, and I think they do look different right now more than they ever have. So reflective of the people who live there, which it also has promoted innovation, like different leadership team comes up with new ideas. So we've certainly seen that in Empower too. Throwing a group of people that have not worked together, it's pretty interesting, what comes out of that. So yeah, a couple of things.
Liesl, maybe I'll transition to you. You mentioned it in the opening about the leadership boot camp. I'm curious, what the first go rounds of that have been, and what do you see as the need and kind of the plan for growth there?
Well, kind of to backtrack a little, Empower Iowa, one of the 3 task forces is Grow, and that theme has been on growing rural leadership, has kind of been their overarching focus over the past few years. And one of the outcomes was the Leadership Exchange event and then the Leadership Boot Camp. And that really stems to the fact that we noticed that the rural communities that were thriving were those that really had leadership at the helm. It wasn't like a certain population point. It wasn't any kind of, business or industry that really kind of was pushing it. It was that group of people, whether it be government or organization or just individuals, that are really pushing that needle forward. So in an effort to kind of foster, how do you grow leaders, right? I mean, that's kind of a challenge. We saw a lot of great leadership programs that already existed around the state. And actually, the Leadership Exchange was an outcome from a program that ABI used to host, where they would bring together existing leadership programs to share information and just bounce ideas back and forth to make our leadership network stronger. So they went dormant just because of different focuses, and handed it over to us and let us pick it up. So for the past 2 years, we have had this leadership exchange. Last year was the first one in person in Newton. And we decided to partner with this leadership boot camp because we heard from many communities that were interested in starting a leadership program, but didn't really know how to begin. So the leadership boot camp included kind of a small stipend, $1,000 grant program that they received that money, but then they also participated in a day-long immersive boot camp, and it was intense. I think we started at 8 a.m. and it went all the way till 4 p.m. We broke down every step of what a leadership program is. Each of the communities that participated and received this award brought a team of 3, because we know you work better when you kind of have other brains around you. We gave them a lot of time to brainstorm after each different chapter that we presented using leadership experts from around the state. And then we partnered them with a mentor who will now be with them for the next year. And this mentor is someone who's just been really involved, either leading their own leadership program or just in that leadership realm, who can answer questions, can meet with them quarterly or more as needed. So you asked, sorry, long-winded answer on how it's going. Well, that event was in October. So, I mean, we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going yet, but we've heard some great feedback. Some of the programs have already opened up their application period. So they have designed their program, designed their curriculum, and now they're opening up for applicants. Others are planning to open this fall, so they're still in the planning period, but all of them are moving forward, and we had 13 participate in the first round, so we were really excited about that. Our goal is for this program to not be an annual program, because all communities and regions will have a leadership program that they can rely on. So we're really excited about it. We do plan to have both the Leadership Exchange and the boot camp annually as we move forward. We continue to bring in new leaders and programs across the state. The Leadership Exchange is technically rural focused, but we actually had many urban communities participate as well, because there's just that interest in learning from each other. And it doesn't matter if you're a leadership program in Cedar Rapids or in Algona, you're kind of still doing the same things. So it was really great to see them all learning from each other.
Well, and I would imagine that that's a key ingredient to a community's vitality. I mean, you see that, when the community cares and when different people get involved. I would think that that's one of the difference makers. Is that you're all nodding? So,
Well, Zach, I have to tell you, we were just traveling the state and visited a few communities. Some were had more of that vitality and more vibrant, and their main streets were full. Others were new to that and trying to figure out how they could change that role. And I asked some of my staff at the end of the day, what do you think the difference was between these two communities who had the same amount of resources essentially possibly available to them? And they just said it was leadership. And also just a deep love of their communities and the willingness to see what's in front of them, not as a hurdle, but as an opportunity. And so these type of leadership exchanges and programs to develop rural leaders, even if some of them are in the city, that's fine, is something we're excited about at the USDA because our customers are these rural communities. And so we often will make calls on rural communities and they haven't heard of us, or the clerk has changed, 3 times in the last 5 years. And so building a program where we develop those leaders, they build some continuity, and we can develop relationships, and then through those relationships, get those resources into their hands so they can invest in libraries or hospitals or wastewater systems and housing.
And I mean, those are big ticket items for a lot of the smallest communities in the state. And so having access and knowing that those streams exist can bring reality a lot quicker, I would imagine there.
Zach, can I
Yes.
jump in just one thing to
Sure.
follow up on Theresa? That whole theme of connecting resources with communities is really that is our theme with the Iowa Rural Development Council and really the Empower Rural Iowa effort too, in just a little different way. But the Rural Summit is coming up. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, because that's how we figured out in the Rural Development Council, how do we connect our resources? A bunch, 75 of us sitting around with a resource that could help somebody. And, if they don't know it, doesn't help them. And also those best practices like Liesl described for the leadership exchange, communities, there aren't a lot of new ideas. There's a lot of reworks of old ideas, and sometimes an old idea sparks the innovation. So those best practices have been really critical in our agenda in our conference with the Rural Summit. And so the 6th one is coming up April 12th and 13th in Ames.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate you mentioning that. And one of the topics that I wanted to dive into, and maybe this is a spot where there are some new things happening, is with housing. And so, Liesl, I was going to start with you. Tomorrow's session goes into greater depth about housing, but I'm curious, you made a grant to Iowa State to help with 3D printing of housing. And I'm curious, kind of each of the different ideas in terms of housing stock and affordability. You're also heavily involved in the surveying and communities kind of taking stock of what they have. And I think that's one of the first stops in terms of getting assistance. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing with the housing stock, why that's such an important topic to get addressed.
Absolutely. And of course, it's one that we all hear a lot, is housing is a challenge, whether you're in urban or rural. And rural have a few different challenges in addition to just lack of housing, and that it's hard to get resources there. It's hard to get workers there to actually develop. So Empower Iowa and IEDA are just looking at all of the potential options that might help be a piece of the solution for this housing challenge. You mentioned the housing assessment piece. I do manage the Rural Housing Assessment Grant Program, which actually I wanted to have a much longer name because it's really more about rural housing assessment implementation and interpretation. But they said that was too long.
You're filling those business cards pretty quickly there.
I know, exactly. Just throw a bunch of big words. But we have partnered with ISU Extension and Outreach, and they go through with each grantee a rural rural housing readiness assessment process, where they don't do the assessment for them. A lot of that information is actually available for free through the Iowa Profile tool online that IFA has made available. But instead, ISU helps each community to really assess what that data is saying, and then take the next steps for implementation. So they hold multiple community meetings, and then they come up with a report that kind of gives next steps. And the grant is good because it provides them the seed funding for that next step. So it could be anything from helping to demolish a dilapidated home so that there is an open lot that is developable, to actually working with consultants to reform their comprehensive plan to make it more developer friendly. So there's a wide range of ways that communities have used this implementation funding, and that's intentional. We know that not every community is the same. Not every community needs a single family home development in green space. Some of them need infill, some need upper story housing. So we are kind of looking at all of those pieces, and the 3D homes may be one piece. So I think that IEDA is excited to be partnering with ISU on that, to kind of see what that future might look like. I mean, how crazy this concept of printing 3D homes. But it's not the only one. I mean, we have heard from Homes for Iowa with Iowa Prison Industries and how they are working to develop homes that are really good fits to put into empty lots in communities. So there's a bunch of different moving pieces in the housing world that may together help to solve this kind of housing challenge.
Well, and Director Greenfield, I know that USDA, I think it was 250 of the 700 million last year was directed towards housing. Can you speak a little bit more about the assistance and what that looks like?
I can, Zach. And together is the right word here when it comes to helping communities solve their housing questions, to increase their housing supply, regardless of whether it's single family, upper story, multifamily. The togetherness is important. What we do there's a number of things we can do at USDA, but we really help with the direct mortgages to low and very low income families, some moderate income families, workforce kinds of families. We have loan guarantees, so we work with the banks on the backside to guarantee some of those loans. Just really make sure that as many Iowans as possible have access to the lending they need to purchase a home. We also do something that I think is sort of unsung and not touted enough, so I'm going to tout it. And that's what I call our 504 grant program. We provide up to $10,000 grants. Of course, this is all in the rural areas, for homeowners to make improvements to their homes. It can be a furnace or an air conditioner, a roof. It can be a ramp to allow someone who is handicapped to access their home. The list is long on what we can use those dollars for. And again, they're focused on the low and the very low and moderate income folks across the state. So just, reach out to USDA. Again, we have 11 offices around the state. We're here to partner. Second, we also have a number of grant programs to provide some of that technical support to do placemaking studies, to do infrastructure studies. So we just have some tools that we can connect with some of the tools that the state has and our nonprofits have to solve that housing puzzle.
And I was curious, Liesl and Theresa, you see the location data of some of this. Is this coming from all across the state? Are there areas where, maybe there's been greater success, or can you speak to some of what you're seeing in terms of, are the applications coming from all around the state? Or are they clustered in some way?
Well, I'll go first on that. I'll tell you, there's not a community I visit that doesn't mention housing as one of their number one needs. And so there is a lot of creativity and collaboration on how to solve those needs. With USDA, we invest in communities But we also invest in our electrical cooperatives, our telecoms around the state to help them build out and modernize their electric grid systems. As part of that, though, they also have resources that come from USDA grants and revolving loans to invest back in the community. And we are seeing a couple of our electric cooperatives using their matching grants to get involved in this housing problem solving, shall I call it. So up in Grettinger and Spencer, and I think in the Spirit Lake area, those electric cooperatives have used their grant resources to help do some site development. So that's a first step. Create those lots, put the street in, those utilities in. We need to figure out where those homes come from. And then folks are welcome to come back to us at the USDA to get their mortgage and their lending. So again, it's that collaborative connection, but those are some of the things USDA is doing.
Okay. And I'm curious, is that one of the situations where leadership again has to know that that opportunity exists, or are there folks kind of going out and saying, hey, think about this?
Wow, that is the big question. We struggle with that all the time as far as how to get the word out there. And really, I think the Iowa Rural Development Council has been a very key piece in helping to spread the word, because so many different organizations are part of the Rural Development Council that they have now become kind of the network of spreading the word. So the more that we can share those resources with other resource providers, the easier it is for the communities to find out, because most communities, if they have the leadership at the helm, are plugged into at least one network. So maybe it's the League of Cities. So therefore, our partnership with the League of Cities becomes really critical so that they can help share the information from, Empower an IEDA or USDA or what have you. So that's been a really key piece.
I have a question that was submitted, Director. Are there USDA grants available to municipal electric? Hang on one second, it disappeared off my screen, as well as to the rural electric co-ops. I think you were just answering that to say yes.
Yes, absolutely. There are loans and grants, both are available. And they're available for the electric system. They're available for broadband. So we did a large grant up in the city of Sage for their building out their municipal broadband system. And I was just in Clarion for a really fun event where we helped them celebrate 2 awards. One was to the city of Clarion, over $8 million, so they could rebuild their water system and continue to grow. But 2, with it was dovetailed about $90 million to Corn Belt Power, a large electrical distribution co-op up in the area. And so they work hand in hand to grow the businesses and provide the resources. I would just encourage folks to remember that USDA, we invest in this kind of infrastructure that then makes building houses something we can do, whether it's water lagoons, wastewater systems. We get involved and try to work with communities on all of those infrastructure needs to help them put down a good base to build their community.
Sandy?
Jack, I just wanted to pop back to the question of how do the communities connect with all these resources? And Liesl did a great job with the Rural Development Council. I think the key is, nobody asks for help until they need it. It's like, okay, we give them this menu of stuff, but when they really need it, we often say there are no wrong doors. Like if you called any of us, we could get you to the right place. And I think that's true. I mean, we're, cast of thousands, we're part of it. So I think I always tell people, start within your own community. You all have a local economic developer or chamber of commerce, and those folks do know what are the resources and who to send people to. So I think instructive wise, that would be my suggestion.
I was going to flip around. There's an infusion of cash coming as COVID recovery dollars, and whether it be to the municipalities, the counties, and to the school districts in different. There's about as many acronyms as you can. I won't give a quiz on that, but it creates a unique opportunity for investment in some of these partnerships that exist. And I'm curious, how much energy has been around some of those discussions. And I'm in Lynn County, and I know that there's still some decisions to be made with even where that would be allocated. And so I'm curious what energy that's creating across the state.
Well, I'd say I'm on my own city council, so I've been definitely involved in those discussions within my own community. And certainly in our discussions, in our work with Empower, often there's at least references to there is this new money and let's be using it effectively, and can it leverage something else? And so yes, to some degree. I think there's still some mystery around it though too, Zach. It's not cut and dried.
I would imagine that that's one of the stories to be told at this point.
Well, I tell you, Zach, with the American Rescue Plan, Iowa is scheduled to receive about $4.5 billion. And some of that's to cities and some of it's to counties. I'm, of course, at USDA Rural Development interested in what we can do to help those small communities with the lower population. But again, I think this is where you're going to see a lot of collaboration between the federal government and the state government. These dollars were invested to really help the country recover from COVID. And so we have seen already here in our state, the governor has invested about $100 million into affordable housing, something we've been talking about today, $100 million into airports, $200 million into broadband. These are some of the fundamental infrastructures that will help our communities move forward. At Rural Development, we got a little more nitty gritty into communities and focused through our community facilities programs on the healthcare systems across the state. So I was recently in Villisca and was there talking about some of the resources they've received from some road improvements. But, the Clarinda fire chief stopped by and talked about how important it was that they had received some of these disaster ARPA dollars to help them get a new fire truck and some fire equipment. The CFO from the Montgomery County Hospital stopped by, and they'd received a grant of over $200,000 to help them get some healthcare equipment that they needed. And so I think many healthcare systems across the state have received those ARPA resources to help them, one, face the pandemic, and two, to recover. And so those dollars are going to continue to flow around the state to make our communities stronger.
Okay, well, and switching gear, one of the other challenges that'll be a theme later in the week is workforce. And I think if housing isn't at the top of the list of every community that you stop in, I think finding bodies for workforce is. And so I'm curious, Liesl, as you're starting to see things, are there, communities, starting to remote work is an opportunity for folks to maybe stay rural and work from there. But also, it presents a local challenge because maybe that's one less person working in a rural community. I'm curious what you're starting to see. The new normal hasn't been fully written, but how are you seeing that kind of impact rural communities?
Well, I think Sandy touched on this earlier on, where she talked about how rural communities are kind of seeing this remote worker opportunity as a real opportunity to attract to the lifestyle of rural. So many rural communities are not necessarily seeing it as their current population is going remote and therefore not working in their stores, but instead, how can we attract new people to live here and enjoy life here, quality of life, but then maybe work remotely from their home? Or we're seeing more remote working facilities they were very urban until more recently, when we're seeing these co-working spaces pop up in very small communities that you maybe before COVID never would have thought would have potential. And now it's like, oh, hey, this might be the new normal, so that you can work someplace that maybe isn't the local coffee shop. And so that's been kind of a really interesting twist. And one partner that we have, they've received a couple rural innovation grants actually, is the Creative creative innovation lab out of Dubuque, and they are creating a very hub and spoke model where they had a very successful model in Dubuque, but multiple rural communities in the region were interested in having their own innovation hub. And so now they have, I believe, 3 or 4 open, active rural hubs that are all connected to their main spot in Dubuque. And it's been a great model for rural because it kind of is turnkey. So they have all the systems in place for this kind of co-working space, also innovation creative lab. It's kind of a multi-fold system in multiple communities. We had the opportunity to visit the one in Monticello before it opened, and very cool space, very excited about that opportunity in town. The whole town is buzzing about it. So we're kind of seeing that model. We also visited Gravitate in Jefferson and saw their co-working space where they were very urban, and they were like, hey, let's try out this rural model. So I think that's something that we're seeing where rural communities are like, hey, we can maybe get a different type of workforce in our rural communities that will help the population problem. So I think that's one effort. And I mean, workforce for other businesses that need warm bodies is going to continue to be an issue, a challenge. That's just kind of the way the world is right now. But we're seeing kind of innovative ways of even managing that, the more flexible hours, the same type of things that you see in urban areas, where they're bringing in people for maybe different phases, having, different staffing options, and rural communities are handling it the same way as our urban towns are.
Okay. I was curious, if there are other thoughts, Sandy. I mean, you spent a lot of time making recommendations ahead of, as part of the task force, the Empower Rural Iowa task force. Ahead of COVID, you were making recommendations on how to handle it. How well, for workforce and some of those things, how well do you see those recommendations holding up?
Well, I think the recommendations have changed a bit, but there's certainly, definitely the need certainly hasn't changed. And the whole idea of growing our population, there's really a limelight on that. And the Iowa Business Council actually, I think, is taking that as kind of their #1 challenge. So we're working with them too. And we're also, I think that's another important theme for us with Empower and these issues. We look to see what already exists that's working, and how do we enhance some things that are already there that are working, and what changes, how can we make changes that really are going to affect specifically workforce. So I think we've kept our pedal to the metal on this, all these issues. We've been able to keep plugging away in spite of COVID. Actually, Zoom was better for us, I'd say. Wouldn't you, Liesl? Like everybody attended the meetings. It was like, wow. The downside was all those lovely examples that Liesl gave of projects that we've actually visited, and Theresa the same. That just happened in the last couple of months. We missed that opportunity, which is so helpful for our people to actually see when we're talking about what are those cool things that are going on to enhance workforce. To actually see the projects and the people behind them is so much better than all of us talking about it on Zoom. But our work, we're still plugging away, and the same, I think we've revamped some of our efforts, certainly, but, the themes are there.
Well, and one of the things to make Zoom or to make some of these co-working spaces work is broadband. And so that's another of the themes. And I know that we could probably spend a half a day talking about this, because it became immediately evident of the haves and the have-nots. And I'm, obviously there's been a huge investment, and there are a lot of projects going on, just probably starting to dig as we get into spring. I think it's about $300 million total investment in broadband grants since late last year. I'm curious, how far does that go to solving this problem? What demand is left, and what opportunity do you think there will be, for additional rounds of funding?
Well, go ahead, Liesl.
I was going to say, we can do reconnect first, or
yes, I'm sorry, too many questions at one time. Let's start with reconnect.
All right. So the USDA is committed to investing in broadband. Secretary Vilsack, when you listen to him speak, he says it all the time. You know, high-speed internet is the new electricity. You have just got to have it. Businesses, schools, healthcare, the list is long. And so the USDA is investing. We have the Reconnect program. We've done 2 rounds of it, have been awarded about $50 million across the state. Head on down to Stanton, Iowa, to really get a feel for how they have been able to use that program. And they're committed to fully building out 4 counties in that area. Very exciting, very much a regional approach, very much a collaborative approach. So that's fantastic. Round 3 just closed, but we know there's about another $2 billion coming out in that, not all to Iowa, of course. And the infrastructure bill had enormous amounts of resources that are coming both for the Reconnect program, but then also to the states as part of the infrastructure bill. So it is going to be a 2-pronged approach, both federal dollars and state dollars, whether they're coming in from your federal tax dollars back to the state or whether they're coming from the state. Because there is a joint commitment here, is a bipartisan commitment. It is every town across the state supports it, and our telecoms are doing a great job to access those resources and working feverishly to get fiber to every home and every business and every farm in this state. That's the goal. I can't answer the question, Zach, I'm sorry, as to where we're at in 100% coverage, but we're getting there.
Yes, I will echo a lot of what Theresa said, is that we don't really know yet exactly where we're at, but the progress has been huge as far as where we were just a few years ago and where we are now. Some of the problem now is just supply demand to actually get the fiber in the ground. So I know we have quite a few grantees that are just struggling to meet deadlines because of supply chain issues, as a lot of different industries are struggling with. And yes, the local telcos, I mean, I'm not exaggerating that my broadband connection in Ankeny is worse than in Stanton, Iowa, for sure. So they really are doing a great service. But the goal is obviously to get to that, that final business, that final farm, that last acre. So hopefully soon we will have, I know that they're continuing to work on updating the maps, so that I know that's a continuing conversation I hear from the Connect task force and many of the providers on that task force, is that the maps aren't necessarily reflective. So OCIO is partnering with another organization to try to update the map so they really accurately reflect where we're connected, where we're not, where those needs are. And then, I mean, hopefully the next goal is everyone's connected and we can just work on increasing that level of connectivity moving forward. That is the ultimate goal.
I would just chime in with the fact that we have more independent telephone companies than most states. So we already had that kind of infrastructure, if you will, that's unique to Iowa. And they quietly, the Jefferson Telephone Company just talked about their fiber was in the 70s, like it wasn't a new idea. So, it's just now the expansion and those last miles and all that. So I think that's really exciting. And the Empower Rural Iowa, Liesl did a great job on the connect of the education. Like we had the OCIO, we had the investor owns, we had the independents, and everybody's really working together, which we have not seen that. So that's another positive coming out of our work, I think, is that competitors aren't so competitive. If the goal stays the same, the big goal of connecting everybody, then we've got to work together. So, and that's happening. And a little money didn't hurt.
And one thing, sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention is one of the items that the Connect Task Force has now been looking at is how to leverage that technology once you have it, so that communities are actually able to market this opportunity. And there were 2 different certification programs that were created last year, and they're still in the development stage, but that would address kind of a remote worker certification and a connected community certification. So really interested in kind of to see how those programs develop so that these communities can kind of say, hey, we have, such and such speeds, and our homes and our businesses are connected. So we're kind of even seeing enough connectivity throughout the state now that communities are saying, okay, hey, now we have it. How do we use it?
Excellent. I have an audience question that was submitted, and this one, it may vary between different areas, but to what extent are faculty members at Iowa's universities, state universities, involved in the organizations and the projects that all three of you have been talking about today? I don't know who wants to attempt to quantify that.
Well, I would just say all three Regent universities and the community colleges are all represented and very active and involved. So with specific projects like the boot camp, you and I really had the lead, their faculty, and yeah, I mean, they all have a specific role. Liesl mentioned Iowa State's work. University of Iowa Public Health has been really involved with the work of the Rural Development Council and other things. So, and they, again, if I had to say, what am I most proud of with community work? That's one of the things, this lack of competition, but cooperation has been exceptional. And that's one area that I would highlight.
And I just got to give a pitch to our community colleges also. They have really stepped up on the workforce issues, have shown themselves to be pretty nimble, and have launched programs to meet the needs of the area businesses. They're really thoughtful about their regions and collaborating with providing the education and certifications that are needed. And what can I say? I'm a community college grad alumni myself, so I had to give them a plug.
Oh, and I would just say, just from my seat, and having worked with many of them, I mean, the University of Iowa is in our backyard. Iowa State has their hands in lots of things through the extension programs, and UNI does as well in some of the leadership and those programs. But the workforce work that the community colleges, I think that's been the number of integrations there and how deep that runs. I mean, it's down to, I think the interest is now almost to the individual person and identifying individuals and what opportunity they could have to reskill. And it's pretty fascinating.
We have a few private colleges that are really involved with Empower as well. I mean, BVU and Central come to mind. We have very active task force members on both. So I'd say very plugged in to that network across the state.
It's sort of, how dare me as a Wartburg grad to not talk about the privates, like shame on me.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I think you could have a list of, it's kind of like going to the Oscars. If you have to remember to thank everybody, inevitably somebody gets left behind. We talked about Stanton, which is in Western Iowa along the lines of broadband, but they've also stood out for some of the work that they've done with childcare, which is another of the angles that exists. And there's been a lot of discussion at the State House about addressing childcare. But I'm also curious from the standpoint of the business partnerships and with some of the work on the task force, what you see as kind of the solutions that need to take shape with childcare. And this is another of the themes that'll come up later in the week, but it's a key theme to community vitality. I'm
going to just jump in here quickly, but Liesl really has the details. Because of that housing readiness program that she described so nicely, we learned that that's really a step with childcare too. First of all, you have to understand if the numbers, it's a business. So you've got to have a business plan and understanding of, just to say you want effective childcare isn't going to necessarily work everywhere. So we started Empower came up with a readiness program that she can tell you about.
Yes, we actually had our first round that was announced just in January of the Rural Childcare Market Study Grant Program. And the first round, we partnered with First Children's Finance because they are an expert in the field and have a really great product. And we wanted that first round since we're not necessarily childcare experts, for them to kind of set the bar on what that market study should really look like. And we had 7 awardees from across the state who are currently working with First Children's Finance. But the reason we saw this as a real need was actually the governor, during her travels around the state, talked to a couple communities who had done a market study and were surprised by the results and maybe had to pivot the way that they were going to be addressing their challenges. Or the flip side, communities that had failed maybe centers, because I thought that's what they needed, when really they needed more in-home options or different shift options. So this market study is really to make sure that funding, time, energy, what have you, is going towards the right type of filling the right needs in each community. So we're really excited about this program. Actually, we're First Children's Finance, IEDA, had put some money towards the Fairfield project that had its ribbon cutting, I believe, just last week. So we're already seeing, we're kind of going through those steps. It might take a little longer to get through those studies first, but it results in a product that actually meets the needs of your community. So I think that's going to be the solution, is to make sure that you kind of know where the needs are before you just assume that you need a bigger center in every rural community.
Yeah, and this administration is focused on childcare and investing in childcare facilities, however the community decides that they need them, because they just see it as essential infrastructure for economic development and community vitality. And so at USDA, we help invest and provide loans and grants for childcare. It's one of the things that we do. Humboldt is a great example. Their little kitty cats, it's called. Their childcare center was a collaboration between the community and nonprofits and leaders in that area. And then we were able to participate with some grant funding for them. And we do this across the state. So I guess if there's a takeaway on childcare, once you've done your needs assessment, see if we have a program where we can lend a hand to. We may not be able to solve the entire need, but we want to come to the table and be a partner across the state in solving the childcare dilemma that we have, which is a real hurdle for economic development.
Liesl, I was just going to ask on the round of the business assessments, what is the timing for the groups that are doing it now? And then do you see this becoming an annual kind of award?
I'm so glad you asked, because I actually failed to mention that the application round is currently open for a second round. So we actually have some additional funding available. This round, each applicant, which has to be a community or nonprofit, needs to identify who their partnership organization will be that will actually be doing the market assessment. It doesn't have to be First Children's Finance, although it absolutely can be First Children's Finance. And that closes May 3rd. So if you're interested, that is live and on iowagrants.gov. We do hope that this is an annual program, at least for the next few years. We definitely see the need is there. It depends on funding allocations, but we definitely hope that it is an annual need. As far as kind of the timing, essentially the grants it works out to be about 1.5 years, but it likely we had 7 awardees. They will probably complete within this year their market study. First Children's Finance, who's working with all of them, works really closely with their local committee to determine kind of the timing of that. And sometimes it's hard to get schedules to align, so sometimes things get pushed back. But it's kind of all community run as far as how those conversations go, how the outreach goes, things like that.
And are you seeing more of the applications like business partnerships, or are they, more nonprofits? Is there any way to quantify kind of what you're seeing is the energy in the space right now?
We had a good mix for this first round. We did have quite a few actual city governments that made the application, but their committees were often made up of business owners, managers, industries, other kind of a good collection of everyone at the table, which is exactly what we recommended, was that they have kind of a really holistic look on their committee to help inform what the needs were there.
Okay. Well, and I know we're running close to time here, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I wanted to maybe just pose one last question, and it's, as we go forward, where do you see the biggest opportunity or challenge? And I guess if each of you had one that you had to name, what would it be? And if you have a second idea of what you would do about it, please feel free to add. And Director Greenfield, I think it's your turn in the rotation.
All right, well, I've got one that I think is uniquely ag and uniquely USDA, and we're doing something about it, and that's meat. I'll tell you, everywhere you go across the state, lockers are booked, and they're booked into 2023, and I don't even want to hear if somebody's booked to 2024. We need more capacity. We need more competition. And Secretary Vilsack recently announced numerous programs, loans, grants, and loan guarantees to make a difference. I just got the chance to visit the Nave Family Beef new processing facility over in Comanche. They are opening their doors soon. They'll be doing 60 head of cattle a day and looking at the opportunity to double that as once they get up and running. But we have resources, grants in particular. I think there's 18 little lockers across the state, like in Sully and Mingo and others that, are going to be able to process a few more head of beef or more poultry. This is critical. We're one of the #1 meat producers in the country, and we have to grow that capacity. And the USDA has resources to make that happen for our rural processors.
All right, Liesl.
All right, well, I'm going to say one of the biggest opportunities is to really focus in on our, each community's local assets and those quality of life pieces that make such a difference on residents deciding where they want to live and work and play. I think that has been maybe a little bit of a shift when we think about economic development, is that people really are choosing where they want to live, and then they're figuring out work from there. So I am working with rural communities on really identifying what makes them different and special, and they know what it is because they are proud to live where they are, and then how we can elevate those little pieces to really enhance the quality of life in those local communities. I think of the city of Manning, a very small town, but with a very vibrant main street that is just beautiful with lovely streetscaping. And then they've put in a really beautiful park that has a giant Iowa sculpture that is just made for social media posting. And so just different ways that communities can kind of leverage that thing that's making them a little different and special, and how that's really a big piece in community and economic development.
Excellent. Sandy.
Well, I'm going to end with, since we're coming into summer, I think the whole aspect of getting people in the communities so the community can tell its story. And for all of us, find that field trip for your own family, make it a Saturday. Let's go somewhere we've never gone and let's check it out for ourselves. We've heard a lot of good stories today about places that we should go. And I think likewise, communities need to invite people in. I mean, there's breweries and wineries and fun things to do everywhere now. We've made the fun thing. I don't know if we're talking about it as much as we need to. And so I'm all about, let's get the people out there and get excited and then tell somebody else. So communication is either the problem or the solution.
Well said, Sandy. And that will kind of wrap things. We'll leave it there for today. Just a couple of quick announcements. This is the first Iowa Ideas in Depth Week of 2022. We have 2 more weeks coming up, one in May with a focus on human and social services, and one in July with a focus on healthcare. This week in community development continues. Tomorrow's discussion at noon is around creative affordable housing. And the full Iowa Ideas Conference is scheduled for October 13th and 14th, which will again be virtual, again be free to attend with registration. And so we're pleased to have our opening keynote confirmed. It's an internationally acclaimed opera performer, Simon Estes, who has a unique Iowa story to share and is still going at it every day. And so we're very excited to welcome him as our opening keynote. And so folks can register as well as find the other programming that you may miss on iowaideas.com. Sandy, Liesl, Director Greenfield, thank you all for your time today. I appreciate you joining, and to all of you, have a great day. Thank you.